we will move right into the role of the Board of Directors. You're representing a lot of different kinds of properties, and I know we have one community that has 3 or 4 board members, none of whom has ever been here before, still working with the developer. You have some communities here who have just recently turned over from developers, and I don't think we have anybody from a developer-controlled community, do we? If we don't count cottages? No, we don't. Okay, so we have condominiums, we have high-rises, and of course we have homeowners associations that are subdivisions. You all are there for a reason. Primarily, well, you have 3 reasons. One is you're there to make decisions. You are the ones who are going to make the decisions, you're going to decide what the fees are, you're going to decide who the contractors are, you're going to decide what the common areas look like, you're going to decide how you're going to engender a spirit of compliance with the community standards. With the budget, we as your management company, of course, do prepare a budget draft for you. We do that early enough in the year that you have an opportunity to review that, but ultimately it's your decision. So when you get that budget draft from your manager, you need to familiarize yourself with that, because that becomes your planning document. That is what you use to make it happen in the following year. Not everybody likes numbers, and we have a whole separate workshop on budgets and financials, but I know that not everybody likes numbers. But even if you don't like numbers, you do have to understand what the budget is, what that means, what your association is obligated to pay, and what its income is. And that means, too, understanding what your delinquency situation is. If you have a community, and I know that at least one person here has a community with a very, very high delinquency rate, that affects your budget. You can't just say, I'm expecting 100% of the people to pay, and these are going to be our expenses. Somehow you have to know what your real income is so that you can create fees that are realistic so that you can pay the bills to keep the place going. Particularly when you have facilities like a clubhouse or a pool, you have playgrounds, if you're in townhomes and condominiums, you have buildings, residential buildings to take care of. It's very, very important that you know that you have enough money to meet those obligations. And of course that does include reserves. And you do this as a group. And another thing that you do when you are making decisions is deciding who's going to do what. The most common thing that everybody has, of course, is grounds care. You as a board of directors are going to decide not only who's going to do it for you, that is what contractor, but you're the ones who establish the level of care. It may be that you want your hedges cut 3 times a year or twice a year. It may be that you don't want that to be part of your main contract. It may be that you don't want to do anything more than cut grass. All of these decisions that you make a difference to the common areas of the community that you live in. When you're coming onto the board of directors, it's good for you to review these things. And also when people come onto the board of directors and you're already on the board, tell them, take the time at those first couple of meetings to explain what the parameters of these contracts are and what it is that you're doing as a board of directors. Let them know that you are on the board, all of you, to make decisions as a group. It's very important that you understand that you are working as a team. This is a group dynamic. You have people many times that you're meeting for the first time. Someone's run for the board of directors. We have a couple of people here who have had recent annual meetings. You're meeting some of these people for the first time. They're coming into a board that maybe has 7 people. 2 of them are new. They're clueless. They don't know. They don't have the personal relationships. They don't know who maybe the more outgoing people are, who the leaders are among the group. All of these things have to be kind of figured out. So be aware of that when someone comes on the board and take the time to say, this is what we do as a board of directors. We meet this often. This is what we discuss. These are the decisions that we make. Here's a copy of our budget, that kind of thing, so that they can feel included and be a part of the decision-making process. It's very easy for a new board member to just sit back for the first year or so and say, I just want to listen, I just got here. But these are small governing bodies, and you really can't afford that. You have to keep those people get those people informed and up to speed, you might say, as quickly as you can, so that they can help you in that group decision-making process. Because you have things going on all year long. It's not just the contracts, and it's not just the budget. You have owners who are going to be coming to you and asking for permission to build a fence or build an addition. You might have someone who has an idea about doing something in the common area, or someone who wants to revise bylaws or start social events, all of these things that are going on here. So you as the board have to understand how each other works so that you can work as a team. Very, very important, so that you can make the decisions. As we say all the time, you're the leaders. You're the leaders because you're here. You're planning. Something that you can, some of your associations are very, very busy, and your meetings are very, very busy. Your agendas are full. Remember, though, to take the time to plan. In this state, you can meet informally. You don't have to tell everybody that you're getting together to meet. So there's nothing wrong with just having a planning session. And sometime, I personally think it's a good time to do it, well, two good times. One would be around budget time, which is, say, in the fall. Another time is right around the time that you have new people coming onto your board of directors. Get together informally. You're not making any decisions, but talk about your vision and your goals for the next year for your community, and plan. This will help it will help you establish a focus among yourselves, and also give you some things to concentrate on as you're in those meetings. It might be something that may take a couple of years, but you have, for example, well, we have paving. We have an association that's going through, they're just finishing a very large, couple $100,000 paving job. And you can imagine this isn't something that they just woke up last fall and started talking about. This is something that that board of directors planned for years. But finally, they knew that the paving was in such bad shape that it had to be taken care of. So they had to work out a plan to do this, to get bids and do all of those things. One of the things that they had to figure out with the help of the contractor is how they're going to handle traffic while they are paving, right? It's a big deal. It's how you're going to handle traffic when you're, closing people's access to their homes. Actually several people did paving last year. So that's planning. How are you going to do it? Are you going to do it over 1 year? Is it something that may be affected by the seasons? Let's just say you have a very bad year and for some reason you have to put it off because there's too much ice or too much snow or whatever it is. Or maybe you look at the paving and you discover, well, it's more than paving, it's also drainage. You've got some drainage issues that I know you all, they came into with some serious drainage issues. You're looking at it and you're planning. Don't just say it's time to pave, let's get some bids, and let's just move forward. Sit down, analyze, use your manager's skills to help you get together and look and establish some kind of a plan so that things get done. It's a really nice way of doing things. You can get so bogged down in the day-to-day stuff that you can lose that vision. When you're doing that, you often discover that you don't have the money that you thought you had, or you don't have as much money as you will need. And that frequently happens because when you're looking at large projects, and even small projects, you discover that they're going to cost more and that there are things involved that you didn't expect. The drainage example is a really good one, and that probably added, I would say, 30% to your cost? It was a couple $100,000. So probably added at least 30%. It's a lot of money. So you're talking about maybe $60,000 that was added to the project just because of some drainage issues that had to be taken care of in the course of this paving job. So looking at what has to be done as part of it, and also figuring out how you're going to pay for it. You as the board of directors are the ones who set the fees, and in most cases you have the authority to do that without the input of owners' votes. But that means you have to be responsible, you have to work within the guidelines of the documents, and sometimes there are restrictions there. You may look at this and say, we're going to pave next year, and we're just going to increase the fees for 25% for 1 year, and then we will be able to do this paving job, and then the following year we'll be able to reduce the fees. We won't do a special assessment, we'll just increase the fees. And somebody says, oh, there's one little problem here, and that is that the documents only allow us to increase the fees by 10%. It's a very common provision, and several of you here in the room have that provision. You're kind of stuck. Unless you get the owners to approve that, you're going to have to just observe that 10% limit, gradually increase your fees, and then postpone that job, or more likely, do that big job over time instead of doing it all at once. These are the kinds of things that you want to think about when you're planning. And the vision, I like the vision. We do a whole seminar on the vision. But that's true. When you all got on the board of directors, even though it's very possible that you were volunteered to the board of directors, you have some vision. You have some idea of what you want your neighborhood, your community association to be, what you want it to look like, what you want it to feel like when you have guests coming into your neighborhood, what you want it to feel like if a prospective buyer comes into the community. That's your vision. Don't hesitate to share that with your neighbors. I'll use Harpeth Trace Services as an example. And this is a services organization which is different from most of yours because they really just take care of basically roads and drainage issues in the entrance. And they have about 300 homes up there in, I think, 5 subdivisions, 5 sub-associations. And when I was managing them about 10 years ago, the board of directors thought that they would redo the entrance and make it more up to date. They just thought it was an 80s entrance, and they thought it should be more like a 2000 entrance or something. So they hired an architect, and they got some designs, and you all might have been there for that. And the board was really moving quite along, and they had put the money together for this project, and they mentioned it at an annual meeting. I believe they did, yeah. And then they said, okay, we're going to send out a questionnaire just to see what people think about it. And everybody gets to send the questionnaires to me. So I got, out of 300, I've got about 250 responses. Now, you never get that kind of response. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Everybody, there was actually, I think there were 3 people who were in favor of the project. All the others were totally against the project, and they all had the same vision for this community. They all said the same thing over and over again. It was this wooded look and the California look. The California look. Isn't that interesting? And the board didn't know that. Of course, they dropped the idea. They didn't pursue it. But there's a vision, an idea all these people had that nobody had ever shared until it came to this questionnaire, which brings me to something else. If you're wondering about a plan, if you're wondering about doing something, you may not want to invest a lot of money in it without throwing the idea out at an annual meeting or even sending out a questionnaire. It could save you a lot of time and a lot of money, because they worked on this for about a year before they even mentioned it to the owners. So good intentions, but sometimes it's not what everybody else wants you to do. That leads me to the most important role of the board of directors that's the most easy to forget. I know it's one that I didn't recognize for a long time after I became a board member, and that is our role as the leaders in building community, building that sense that we are one, that we have something in common. The obvious ways of doing that: you have newsletters, we can do broadcast messages, we have associations that simply publish their minutes. They make sure everybody gets a copy of the minutes after the meetings. You have social events. But you also are building community in the way that you meet and the way that you make your decisions. It's important that people know that when you are making decisions, when you're acting as a board of directors, that you are acting in a very, very responsible way, a way that will gender their support and respect. If you have that, if you have earned that, you will find that many of the decisions that you make, even though they are hard to swallow, will be accepted. One of the most difficult things that we do as board members is increase fees. Maybe it is the most difficult thing. We all live where we are serving, and even if we don't live there, we're property owners there, and so we're paying the fees as well. And a lot of times we become very aware of the fact that many owners cannot afford to have increases because they have other obligations. And where I live, for example, and those of you who know me say that I'm always bringing mine up because we do so many things the way they shouldn't be done that I can always come up with good stories. But we do have a lot of people who are retired. There are only 87 condominiums, and a lot of them are retired, and a lot of them are on fixed incomes. And so the boards of directors sometimes over the years have not increased the fees when they should have because they felt that it would be a burden to the owners. Consequently, about 2 years ago, the association was in a real bind. They just about cleaned out their reserves, just with things that had happened that was not their fault. They had been saving and all this stuff. It was a responsible board, and finally this one board of directors said, we've had it. We have to have an increase, and it was an increase of $33 a month. That's a big increase. When you're around $200, that's a big increase. And the board said, this is why we have to do it. This has happened, this has happened, this has happened. We've got to do some painting, we've got to do some woodwork. And they went through all this. They put together a really good letter. They explained it to the owners. They sent it to the owners. And the property manager got one telephone call. And the reason was that the owners understood. Even though it was a burden, they understood and they accepted that this was the responsible thing to do. So remember that. You all are usually not talking about $33 increases. You're usually talking about $2 or $3. And the time that you spend on belaboring $2 or $3 is really just out of proportion to what it can do for the community if you're able to increase those fees that way. Your reserves are important, your planning is important, your operating budget's important. And you're building community just by making those decisions. You can see how if you are not spending the money on your common areas that you should be, your community isn't looking very good. People aren't going to be proud of your community, and you may encourage people to move away and rent. You know, and then you have people living there who also don't care about your community. Not that renters are terrible, but simply that you want to have people who do care. And the decisions that you make do filter down. They really do. And of course, you've got to communicate them, which is what I already said. Engage owners in your community. You've been elected to your boards of directors for various terms. And it's very possible that you ran unopposed, which means that it's very difficult to fill the positions, and the assumption can easily be made that there is nobody who really cares except you 5 or 7 people. Whereas in actuality, that's not the case. It's simply that a lot of people are not in a position to serve on a board of directors. Some people are kind of afraid of that whole context of just sitting in something that formal. But you have a lot of talent in your neighborhood. You have gardeners. You have people who may be contractors. You have, if you live in a condominium where you need artwork, you may have artists. You may have people who are volunteer leaders at their places of worship who are familiar with putting together social events for the children or for adults. You've got the talent out there, and among you board members, you probably know a lot of owners and know people with those talents. Use that, draw on that, encourage those people to form committees. If the word committee is intimidating and it makes people disinterested in becoming involved, just say, we want to have a block party for the kids Easter week. Sometime in April, we'd like to have a block party. I know that you're good at this. Could you get a couple of people together to do this? Come together with the budget and let the board know. You didn't call it a committee. You've just given the person something to do. You've given them a deadline, told them that there's going to be some money involved, and you've automatically involved some other people. What you're doing is building community. You're also expanding the whole in essence, the decision-making process, because what they do is going to help you make your decisions. If you see a lot of activity in this, you may think, well, you know, maybe we should have a line for social items. Maybe we should have a line item for that. Or maybe the playground that we've been neglected is one that it's worth fixing up because there are enough children here, and next year we could have something over at the playground or the picnic pavilion or whatever it is. But engaging the owners in that, they will help you, and of course you will help them, because there again, they will see what's happening, and there again, you're garnering more support. Also, what you're doing is that you are building a resource so that for the next annual meeting, you have a couple of people to contact and say, you know, I know you were really active in this particular activity, and it was a great success, and I know that you're very interested in the community, and in the course of it, you were talking about whatever it is, would you like to run for the board of directors? All of these things are your roles. You are the leaders this year. You are the leaders. We've got some ideals for the volunteer leader, and I think that's one of your handouts. I think, is it? Yeah, yeah, it is. It's one of your handouts. One is to direct the association in the best interests of the owners. And I know that everyone here in the room will do that. But it may be that there will be somebody who will come on your board of directors who has more selfish goals. And when you're aware of that, you need to deal with that. And if you have encouraged your board members and remind your board members of the fact that you have a responsibility to your owners, you know, you can't just represent yourselves, you have to see above your own personal interests, then the other board members frequently can convince that other person that this is really not the appropriate place. Sometimes people get on the board of directors for one reason. Maybe they have a friend they want to have be a landscaper, or they just don't like social events. They want to get rid of the social line, or they don't think that fees should ever be increased, and so they'll be darn sure that they'll never vote for a fee increase. You're going to be educating those people, but you also have to know that you have to make your decisions on behalf of all of the owners. And think about that, consciously when you're making your decisions. And you have to protect the interests of the owners. Protect the interests. You have some interest in common because you all are members of the community association. If your community association falls apart, word gets out, real estate agents know about it, for one thing, and you could find that suddenly it's difficult for some people to sell their homes. You have an obligation to maintain at least the common areas. We all have common areas in our community associations. Your obligation at the very least is to maintain those common areas, but also your obligation is to maintain the standards that are established in your governing documents. That's not always easy. And it could be that somebody on your board of directors has gotten on the board because he or she doesn't like the fact that they can't park an unlicensed vehicle in the yard. Well, if the documents say you can't park an unlicensed vehicle in the yard, that's the way it is. And you have to respect the interests of all owners, follow those governing documents, and protect their interests. Because, believe it or not, people do move into community associations on purpose. Some people don't, but most people do because they see a standard and they're expecting that somebody's going to maintain that standard. And that's you. We're your helpers, but you're the ones who are making that decision to do that. Respect. Some of you meet monthly, some of you meet quarterly, some of you meet less frequently than that. And it may be that you get so used to meeting among yourselves, nobody ever shows up at the meetings, that you kind of forget that there's anybody else out there. Don't do that. Just remember that you're there representing the owners. Respect the owners. If someone approaches you as a board member and they have a question, and it's even somebody you don't like, you are a step above now. You're held to a higher standard than other owners are because you are an elected person in your community association. You do have to respect the owners in your community. If someone, you can't play favorites in terms of administering the standards of the community. You can't play favorites in terms of repairing one condominium or townhome a little bit more than the other one just because you know the person and whatever, or maybe forgive there's a case where, for example, an owner should be paying for it, but this person is having money problems, so you say, well, that's okay, we'll let the association pay for it because they can't afford it. You can't do that. You can't do that. You have to respect your role as a leader, your fiduciary duty to all of the owners, but also respect all of the owners and know that you are representing all of them. And communicating is two ways. It's true, sometimes people will call you. Certainly your property manager is going to take as many of those calls as they can. I will say this, having been a board member, if a person is approaching you with a complaint, I would say refer them to the property manager, because you're probably in Kroger, or you're probably at church, or you're probably in the park having a walk, and you're not going to remember this. You're just not going to remember it. That's a business thing. Thank you very much for telling me, but you know what? I'm standing in line and I've been working all day. Please call the property manager. You can email the manager. You can go on the website. You can do all of this stuff. Let them do it. This way, the manager will have a record that you have called. We will know about it, and then we will be able to follow up on that for you. Don't hesitate to do that, or you will go crazy, because people just call you all the time. And then we've got somebody who is self-managed. Your guys are a little bit different, so they can tell you what it's like. But pretty much, do that. Use your property manager. Use the system that we have with Synerthco. It's a great system, and they get inspired at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they call you about something. Say, I'm not the one to call. Call the property manager. But do understand that people will call you. If they know where you are and they know who you are, sometimes they will call and they want to vent. That's just part of the volunteer job. And you don't have to take abuse. I'm not saying that, but certainly be courteous. And if it's anything that needs to be handled administratively, refer them to the manager and make sure that it's communicated to all of the other board members. That's very important. Sometimes somebody will complain to you because they know you and they figure that you'll take care of it for them, but in actuality, you are one of 3 or 5 or 7 or 9 or however many board members there are. So when you're approached with an issue or a problem, it's not yours to handle. Even if you're a president, it may not be. It's one for you to communicate to the other board members, typically through the manager, so that there can be a record of it. And then you can proceed. But it's important that you be open, let people know that you're open, but also as individuals, there is a limit. So those are kind of some little tips. Letting people know that you're interested in what they're talking about really, really helps. Sometimes people just want, they just want to talk. Some people don't understand community associations. They don't, they think that if they talk to you that you're going to be able to solve all their problems. They built the garage without any approval, and it's never going to get approved because it's totally wrong. Don't let yourself be put on the spot, but just know to say, let me just talk to the other board members about this. Let me involve the property manager. Let me check the records. Thank you very much. Invite them to a board meeting, whatever. Respect them, communicate, respect. And I've got more at the very end. Board member responsibilities. So you have a fiduciary duty. I'm not an attorney. We have an attorney coming up a little bit later. So remember, I'm not an attorney. But you stand in a special relation of trust, confidence, and responsibility in certain obligations to others. Those others are your other owners, and also really to anyone that you may come in contact with in the course of your duties as a board member, principally vendors, and of course your manager. We always have to talk about the manager. But you have a fiduciary responsibility as board members. All of you do. All of you do. And remember that. That's an important job that you have. It's not always easy, but it's also not to be taken lightly. I've been on enough boards over the years that I've seen people who just get on and they just kind of think if they just sit there they just kind of sit there because they're there, and they don't participate. You need to participate. You have a duty to participate. You are an owner. You have an interest in this community association, but you're also representing people. So you need to be informed. You need to be informed. They are trusting you to make good decisions. They want to have confidence in you. When you are in your neighborhood, and even when you're not in your neighborhood, remember, if somebody sees you and recognizes you as a board member, they're going to be judging the board member by what you do. I remember when we were children, they'd say, whatever school you went to. I know, we always had uniforms in my school. So they'd say, well, now on your way home, you better be very good because you're wearing that uniform, and if you do something wrong, everybody's going to say, oh, she goes to such and such school. So all the kids would be going like this, we were afraid to do anything between school and home. Well, maybe it's not that extreme, but you will be judged. You will be judged. People will think, oh, that's the kind of community it is. Or if you start talking ill about your board members, or you're not making good decisions and you're kind of communicating this to people, this is all going to come back on your whole board of directors and can really undermine the legitimacy of the decisions that you make. It's very important. Take it seriously. Believe it or not, there are some associations, although I don't think we have any, where the board members actually take an oath. Somebody drew up some little thing and they just, like the Girl Scouts thing or whatever, and they just have some little oath. And the only reason for that is to remind people that this is a serious responsibility. You're members of the board of directors as much as the member of a board of directors is of a large corporation. Your board, you're the decision makers. You're not getting paid for it. You have real interest. But think of it, that is really what you all are. And that's a deal. That really is a deal. So treat it that way. Treat that position with respect and treat your owners with respect, because what you do, remember, they're watching you. They are paying attention. You're setting a tone. You have a couple of things that I show on your outline, the duty of loyalty and the duty of care. I'm going to do the duty of care first. And remembering I'm not an attorney, so Alvin may come up and he may want to elaborate on this. But when you're doing that, what you are doing is, as a board member, acting reasonably as a prudent person in similar circumstances would act. That means that you have to be informed. If you come to a board meeting unprepared and you are looking at a very large landscaping contract that's going to cost your association $60,000, and that's your biggest expense, and you have not taken the trouble to look at those bids, how can you make a reasonable vote in favor regarding that choice of landscaping companies? How can you do that? You've got to be prepared. The decisions that you make may be challenged. Owners don't always agree with the decisions you make. If anybody's been on the board more than a year, you know that. They just don't always agree with you. But if you have acted reasonably, given the information that you have done the right thing. And that means you people here, you're here because you're more interested than other people. That means that you want to, particularly those who are presidents, but your leaders on your boards of directors, insist that your board members review the material regarding decisions before you get to the meeting. That is so aggravating. And you've all probably seen this. The manager gets you whatever this is, they get it to you maybe a week in advance, and then you get to the board meeting and there's somebody who has no paper in front of them, and you say, well, now we're going to look at these landscape bids. This is really, we've decided we don't want this company, we've narrowed it down to 3, and we're going to make a decision tonight. We have to make a decision tonight. And one of the board members says, oh, I never even bother to look at that stuff. I don't care. Well, how are you going to vote? How can that be a responsible decision? Can't be. You have to be familiar with the community's activities and its financial condition. That means that even though you're not a numbers person, you need to understand, to some extent, the financial reports. As your management company, we get those to you early each month. You need to look at them. Don't wait till the night of the meeting to look at them. Look at the report. If you have a question, email the manager and say, I don't understand this. That's okay. We do workshops here. If you really want to sit down with us and other people who don't understand financial reports, let your manager know. We'll add you to the list, and we will do a special little seminar just for people to understand a financial report. It is so important that you understand those numbers, because you're the leaders, you're the decision makers. How can you pass a budget? How can you make decisions about how much money you're going to spend on something if you don't know what the financial condition is and you don't understand what money's coming in and what's coming out and why? So you have to keep yourself informed and participate in the meetings. Again, you have people who want to just sit back. I remember when I was on board of directors, that first year that I was just listening and doing the newsletter, this one fellow was on the board, and for that whole year, he never voted once. He never voted once. But I saw him go out of the meeting frequently, and he would say, oh, I never would have voted for that. I can't believe the board voted for that. So he would just tell all these people, if it was an unpopular decision, and I thought, oh my goodness. So, I didn't know. So when I got on the board, he was still on board, and actually I was president, so it'd be 2 years later. So I got on the board, and he was still on board. He'd been reelected. And he does this again. He's just kind of sitting there, and everybody's voting, and nobody was noticing. And I said, Tom, how do you vote? I said, well, no, you're either going to vote for or you're going to vote against. We can't just have this. And he did. He started voting, and he stopped doing that too. You can't have that. You've got to participate. Make the other board members participate. You've got to inform yourself so that your participation is informed, and act in good faith. You're not experts. Sometimes you may need to call in experts. We know that. Sometimes we need attorneys. You may need to have a reserve study specialist show up. You may need to have the landscaping guy come in to advise you on something, or somebody who specializes in drainage. That's okay. We're not experts in everything. The manager isn't an expert in everything. If you think you don't know enough to make an intelligent decision, tell the manager so that your manager can find an expert to advise the board of directors, or at least give you some options. Don't just make some decision out there, so that you can make a decision that's made in good faith. These are the things that make you a responsible board of directors. People see that, even if they disagree with you. Most people respect that, and that will make it successful. And you're also setting the tone for the future for your community. That's so important. Some of you who have taken over associations that were not active, or where boards just refused to make decisions, or even made bad decisions, and you know what a difference that can make to your community. And so you have come in and you have taken the reins, so to speak, and you're trying to bring it back to have it be what you want it to be. That's what you do. And what you do is in good faith. If what you do is in good faith, you're going to be establishing that standard. Establish that for the future. You will not stay on the board forever. Nobody will stay on the board forever. You want to know that you have set a standard that is so high that when you get off that board, you will be very comfortable with the decisions that they make, because you know that they're following that same policy. The duty of loyalty. And a lot of times we're just talking about a conflict of interest. But what you do, you're doing with undivided loyalty in the best interests of your community. And that just sounds wonderful. But it's not always easy. For example, if I am on the board of directors, I live in a condominium, and let's just say the board of directors wants to set a policy regarding patio covers. And the board of directors is deciding whether they should allow them, all right? And I want a patio cover. I'm on the board of directors. I want a patio cover really, really a lot. But it turns out that because of the governing documents, there could be some problems regarding who would be responsible for maintaining it, how it would be insured, whether there's even a right to build that because of the question about what the patio cover would cover. Would it be covering the common area or just a limited common area? All these kinds of questions. But I want my patio cover. Well, in this discussion and in this vote, in particular in this vote, I should not be just thinking about that patio cover that I want. My job on that board of directors is to look at this subjectively and to vote according to the way that is in the best interest of the association. That isn't always easy. It isn't always easy. You may be establishing something having to do with, well, I particularly like limits on parking cars because I don't think they're enforceable. But you might say, okay, we're not going to let anybody park a vehicle in one space for more than 24 hours. Right? The board says that, and I say, well, I don't really think that's right. And the reason is that I've got 2 vehicles, and I only drive mine on weekends, so I'm going to have to get up and drive it, move it every day, and pain in the neck that is. So I'm against it. Well, you know what? That's not my undivided loyalty to my association. That's my particular interest that I just need to be putting aside when I'm making a decision. Very important. When you're there, you're sitting at that table as a board member, you are loyal to the association. To the association. Do not seek to benefit personally from the community's business activities. Sometimes there's an opportunity that may come your way. Or it could be your brother-in-law's way, and he's absolutely the best landscaper you know in the whole world. Nashville, Middle Tennessee, best one, bar none, also the cheapest. Well, if you're going to introduce him to your board of directors and invite him to bid, I do it from the very beginning, say, I want you to know this is my brother-in-law, whoever it is, and I consider him to be the best. Would you like a bid from him? And I will not participate in the voting. And I'm not going to participate in the standards. I'm not going to participate in any of that stuff. Let the board say, we're really not even comfortable with that level. We'd rather have somebody who's completely disinterested. Let them say that. Don't just say, oh, by the way, here's a bid, and I forgot to tell you, this is my, my brother-in-law. Can't do that. Can't do that. It's not your interests. It's the interests of the association. It can happen in a lot of different ways. The patio cover is a good example. And you can have boards of directors that could make members of the board that can make decisions that will really benefit them more than anybody else. Maybe you have something where the board has some latitude to allow people to park recreational vehicles, which is pretty unlikely. I guess some places you can, some condominiums. And so the board's trying to establish a policy on recreational vehicles. And you have this pop-up camper, and you're paying a lot of money every month to keep it in storage. You'd love to be able to park it, right in front of your condominium. Well, you've got to leave that out of it. You just got to leave that out of it because you have to make a decision that is fair to the association. And if you have something that is a conflict, you need to state that. You need to state that. Always keep the association in mind. The business judgment rule. And I think this is where we're going to ask Alvin to. I'm going to introduce Alvin Harris. Many of you know Alvin's name. I'm sure he provides legal advice to us all the time on many, many things, and we asked him if he would talk to you about the business judgment rule.
Kathy asked me to speak a little bit about the business judgment rule. And the business judgment rule is an important concept, and it kind of derives from the fact that you are members of boards of directors of corporations. And most of you are, hopefully all of you are. There are still a few unincorporated associations out there. That's kind of a dicey proposition from a legal standpoint as far as I'm concerned. I always recommend that if you, for some reason, if the developer didn't incorporate your association at the beginning of the development, that you incorporate your association because, as you'll hear, you gain some protections as member of boards of corporations, and in particular, the business judgment rule is one of those protections. And what the business judgment rule says in Tennessee, well, actually, it's been codified. There's a statute in the Tennessee Nonprofit Corporation Act. Most of you are members of boards of nonprofit corporations. I think I represent maybe one or two for-profit homeowners associations, but almost all of them are nonprofit. But this is straight out of the nonprofit corporation statute, and it says, first, a director is not liable, personally liable, for any action taken as a director or any failure to take action if the director performed the duties of the office in compliance with this section. And then it lists what the duties of a director are in the statute, and those duties are to discharge the duties of a director in good faith, as Kathy said, with the care an ordinarily prudent person would exercise under like circumstances, and in a manner that the director thinks is in the best interests of the corporation. So those are things that people can live by. Those aren't really hard rules to follow. They're pretty clear. But as long as you do that, you have the protection of the business judgment rule, which says you, the director, cannot be sued and held personally liable for a decision that you made in compliance with those duties. So that's a really important and good thing. And the business judgment rule also allows you to exercise your duties based on reliance on outside counsel, your accountants, other people within the association, the property manager, people that you reasonably rely on for information in making decisions. And so, you know, in my opinion, this is one of the things that should be the most near and dear to your heart as members of volunteer boards of directors, is that the law recognizes, and really the reason this rule is there is to encourage people to participate and be members of boards of directors without the fear of personal liability for the exercise of your business judgment. And so kind of what that means is that you might make a decision as a member of a board that turns out to be wrong. But at the time that you made the decision, you were using all the best information that you had. Let's just say that you thought, you know, investing your association's reserve fund in such and such an investment was the best thing to do. Well, you know, the market changed, something happened, and that investment decreased in value. Well, as long as you made that decision based on the best available information and you were acting in good faith, no member of the association can later sue you and you know, get a judgment against you personally for making what turned out to be an incorrect decision. You know, some other, just to note, Tennessee courts have recognized that the business judgment rule applies in nonprofit corporations, obviously, and especially in homeowner association situations. There's a case, fairly well-known case called Association of Owners of Regency Park Condominiums versus Thomason. And in that case, there was a homeowner who built a deck on the back of their condominium without permission. So the board, I guess, got a after-the-fact request for architectural change that it rejected. And so that was the question that the court was asked to address. Was it appropriate for the board to reject this application to build a deck? The deck, by all accounts, was very nice, but the board rejected it. And what the court said was, look, boards of directors of homeowners associations, nonprofit corporations, have a very, very wide discretion in making decisions. And courts will not step in to say, we think your decision was wrong. We think the deck looks perfectly fine. The courts are not going to substitute their judgment for the reasonable judgment of a board of directors. And that's kind of what the business judgment rule is saying. So you have some court decisions that acknowledge the business judgment rule and protect board members. But you know, some other examples, I think I mentioned this, of when the business judgment rule might come into effect or apply to you would be the investment of association funds is one that you have to deal with every day. How to prioritize the expenditure of your funds. You know, boards are asked all the time, just like the government and any business, I guess, is to, you know, how are we going to divvy up the money? What are we going to spend it on? those decisions are decisions the board makes every day. So that's a perfect example of when the business judgment rule would protect you, as long as you're making your decision based on available information, you're acting in good faith, and as Kathy pointed out earlier, it's not something that is a conflict of interest for you. Another example that comes up fairly frequently in my practice is a board making a decision about whether or not to file a lawsuit. And that's a decision that doesn't come up, I guess, every day for all of you, but I hear about it. When it gets to me, there's obviously some problem. And you know, that decision to file or not to file a lawsuit, is a huge decision. I mean, there's a lot of considerations, including the time and expense that the association is going to incur in the lawsuit, the probability the association is going to win the lawsuit, what happens if the association doesn't file the lawsuit, is it going to create a bad precedent, allowing someone to do something that the board perceives to be in violation of the governing documents. But, you know, this gets back, I'm glad Kathy brought this up, this function of the board about building community. I mean, I counsel my clients that, look, one of the big downsides to filing a lawsuit is that it's very divisive. It's a big negative in the community. So my advice is always, always, always see if you can resolve the problem somehow. You know, go knock on the homeowner's door and have a sit-down discussion with them, invite them out to coffee, see if it can be worked out in some possible way before filing a lawsuit. But if the board decides to file one or not to file one, that is one of those decisions that the business judgment rule applies to. And the board, individual board members, are generally protected. And so the business judgment rule and director and officer insurance, which hopefully most associations have, and I always recommend that they get it if they don't, are your kind of your best friends as members of volunteer boards. And just as an aside, the real reason to have insurance to protect you is not so much that you're going to really have a whole lot of judgments, you know, against you. If you get sued, you know, the business judgment rule and other legal defenses that you have are going to probably protect you. But the big reason to have that insurance is it pays for your lawyer. Mm-hmm. And so lawyers are expensive. You don't want to have to pay lawyers if you can help it. So anyway, that's my little bit on the business judgment rule.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Did you have any questions? Any questions about the business judgment rule? Thanks very much. That was great. Just going to briefly talk about meetings. You look at your just look at your agenda. Just very briefly talking about meetings and the elements of an effective meeting. Just quickly on meetings, because it's part of your role, and that's why we were talking about it. And I just thought it'd be good to just wrap it up a little bit. We're great believers in agendas. Your manager can prepare the agenda for you. Many times the president prefers to do that. I know when I was president, I always liked to do my own, but certainly we can do the agenda for you. Timed agendas are nice, but get the agenda to your board members before the meeting so that they can be prepared. And you be prepared for the meetings. Everybody be prepared for the meetings. The meeting goes better, you're informed. I know sometimes the managers take a packet of information to the board meeting, but generally I think you'll find that material is material that's already been presented to you in some way. So do take the time to take a look at this material so that you are prepared and you can have a good board meeting. Most board meetings shouldn't last more than 2 hours. And if you've got meetings that are lasting more than 2 hours, it could be that you're not prepared and you're asking a lot of questions, having far too much discussion, and really not spending your time as well as you should. I'm not saying all board meetings, but typically a board, unless there's something really weird going on, you should be able to meet in less than 2 hours. But being prepared is the key and staying on track. Contact all the participants, so that's pretty obvious. And it's a timed agenda, which is what we like. And I think I did this. Did I do this time today? Yeah, I did today's timed agenda. And that's just to give you an idea of how it looks. So you wouldn't do the time necessarily. You'd say it starts at 11:30, and then that lasts for 15 minutes, and then something or other else starts at 25 minutes or something like that. That's nice. A timed agenda is nice for a couple of reasons. When you saw the agenda, you had an idea there's an order, because there's an agenda. You also have an idea of how much the different parts are going to take, and you also see that there is an end to it, which which is really, really important. And if your owners know that there is a timed agenda, they will learn after one meeting and respect you. Hopefully, they will respect you. And it helps you keep on track. If you're a board that meets and opens your meetings to the, and I know there's some here that do that, if you open your board meetings to the owners and you don't have a special owner time, which is something we talk about in another workshop, if they see that you're working to a timed agenda, they know that their input is limited. Basically, it is a board meeting, and they are there to listen. And then they have certain times when they can have input. This helps you do your job, which is to run the association. So I've found a timed agenda is really, really nice, and you can see it's on there. And as I say, you also know you've limited to a certain period of time, which is good. And you control the owner input, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Some associations like to have the owners speak for 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, and that's fine. And then some allow the owners to interrupt during the course of the meeting. I would discourage that. Sometimes you might invite a comment from the owners who are present at a board meeting, but typically I would not do that because it is a board meeting, and you do want to kind of maintain that. I think it helps maintain the legitimacy of the meeting because they can see that this is a business meeting. If you have a lot of conversations between the board members and the owners who are out there, that's going to take away from that whole business mood. And people are judging everything that you're doing when you're watching your meeting. So you're going to be very careful about how you do that. Some boards, like where I live, they like to have the owners' comments at the very end, even if they're going like crazy wanting to raise their hand. In most cases, their questions have been answered by the end of the meeting. So kind of make them sit through the whole meeting. And that's okay. People know they've been doing that for 30 years. So they still do it. And then at the end, if they have questions or comments, then they can bring that up. But that allows the board of directors to conduct its meeting, make its decisions. The board sees you making decisions. There again, you know, you're doing all of this stuff. They can see that you're very good. And a lot of times, you know, they just got to walk out afterwards. I mean, I've seen them do that. They're all mad and all that stuff, and they think, oh, hey, these guys know what they're doing. You know, they're taking this very seriously. They're having votes and they're making decisions and all that. And then you build your legitimacy by conducting a good meeting. And my preference actually is to have them speak at the end, because at the very end, a lot of times their questions have been answered. And if they haven't, then of course you're giving them a forum. But just different ways of handling that homeowner input. And I think that's all. Oh, there's another one. Parliamentary. Yes, John.
Do you have them submit their questions in advance?
Some associations do that. The question was, do we have owners submit the questions in advance? There are associations that do that very successfully. I think that Franklin Green is one of them. Is that right? Franklin Green's here someplace. You put it out to the owners. We meet every month, or we meet every quarter. If you want to speak to the board, please contact the manager a week in advance. The meeting's Wednesday, it has to be the previous Wednesday, so that we can put you on the agenda. Your time will be limited to 5 minutes. A lot of boards do that, and it's very, very successful. It may take a couple of months. If you have some people who are showing up all the time and they're used to just talking, you'll have to announce that at the beginning. But it works. It's a very nice way of doing that. You actually put them on the agenda, and if they show up and they have something that they want to say, you can say, well, that's kind of not the way you do it. You know, we do ask people to be on the agenda so that we can be very careful with our time. And that's a nice way of taking care of that. Parliamentary procedure. There's probably not a parliamentarian in here, there may be, but you do want to follow procedure. Again, you're running a business. This is a corporation. You're volunteers, but people are still expecting you to be the leaders, and they expect that you know what you're doing, and you know that, and that's why you're here, so that we can talk about all these things. So the meeting needs to be orderly. There does need to be an agenda, as we said. You need to stick to the agenda. If someone is not on the agenda, if something is not on the agenda, you can always say, thank you very much. If we have time at the end, we may consider this, or we may have to put this on the agenda for the next meeting. But the parliamentary procedure principally has to do with keeping things orderly so that decisions get made and people also have a chance to talk. All right, so if I have an idea about something and I say, and we're talking about having, well, just make it simple, a social event. And I say, well, I think that we should have a social event for Labor Day weekend. And I'm going to propose that we put aside $500 for that. and somebody else says, well, I think I'd rather have it on July 4th. You know, we're not there yet. The president needs to say, wait just a second, is that a motion, Kathy? And you say, yeah, it's a motion. Okay, is there a second? And somebody else says, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Once you have two people on your board of directors who think something is a good idea, then you have your discussion. If it's only one person, there's no discussion. Have two people say, yep, we think that's an idea, which is actually your motion and your second. Then you have your discussion, all right? And then if you don't like the idea, fine, or if you want to refine the idea and have a vote, that's fine. But you see there's some order there. If I'm the only one who wants to have a social event, why should you let me carry on and talk about that for 10 minutes? Let the president say to me, let's see if there's a second to see if we should discuss this. That really helps you keep on track. And it also, again, your appearance to your owners when your owners are coming to your meetings. Very, very important. That's just one example. Parliamentary procedure doesn't have to be terribly formal. The first motion, the motion, and the second and all that, that's a good idea, but what we've been told is that for most of us, our boards of directors are small enough that we can make decisions without those formalities. In other words, if I make a motion to, I make a motion we have 3 bids for landscaping, and I made a motion for landscaping company A, and everybody says, oh yeah, that's right. Everybody agrees, that's fine. That will do. The president doesn't have to say, oh, well, Kathy made that motion, is there a second? You don't have to do that. Another tip, and I don't really, maybe this isn't proper, but I think for homeowners associations, you need to make it clear with your board members in parliamentary procedure and all of it. You need to agree, tell your new board members when they get on board. If you disagree, you can agree to disagree, but when you get out of that board meeting, it's what the board decided. You can't have somebody who's going out there who's on the board of directors who's saying, oh, well, that was really stupid. I didn't vote for that. That's just the most stupid thing. Because they're going to undermine the legitimacy of your decision. So you have to set that tone and that level of formality, even if it's just having the vote and just making everybody vote is very, very important. That fellow I told you about all the time would never vote. He would just never vote. They'd say, oh yeah, fine. And only because I was sitting there for a year watching the meetings did I notice that he never voted. And he was always the one who'd go out to the community and have some negative remark to make about the board's decision. Well, that sure does not build community. It sure doesn't. So be aware of that, particularly if you're the president. If you're not the president and you're not the person who's presiding at the meeting and you notice that, mention that to them and just say, we all need to be participating and following procedure as much as possible. Minutes, very, very quickly, because we started late and I don't want to finish late. Just very quickly on minutes, your minutes will reflect decisions made and actions taken. That's it. We would, in most cases, the manager is taking your minutes, but in some cases you may have a secretary who's doing that. If that's the case, please discourage them from entering everybody's opinions. Those come back to haunt you. If owners come in and they express opinions, even at the annual meeting, a general statement can be made. The annual meeting, there were several items discussed, including the pool company and whether there should be a social event and the fact that the landscaping needs to be more consistent. You can do that. You don't have to say that Mary Jones said this and so said that. That really isn't a good idea. There's no reason to keep a record of that. It's decisions made and actions taken. And then certainly in an annual meeting, I like to have something that just shows the topics that were discussed. And since the annual meeting is a time of information, it's the only time the board of directors gets to see the owners. Certainly some summary of the president's report is appropriate.
Kathy, one thing to mention is with the new law, those minutes can be accessed by buyers and sellers.
Oh yeah, if you're in a condominium, yes, yeah. Scott's right. If you're in a condominium, and a lot of you are, you're governed by the Condominium Act, and you may have an interested party. And I could be an interested party. That I don't think it's defined yet, is it? Have they defined what interested party is? But typically to be a buyer and yeah. And so they could look up to 12 months of your minutes. Well, sometimes the stuff in minutes just doesn't need to be there, And you don't want to have a potential buyer, looking at all this stuff that, was just kind of some little grumbling that, is old. It's going to reflect badly on your community. So just the decisions made and actions taken really helps us when we give those minutes out. Remember that you're the leader, and reflect on the association's performance. A couple of months ago, we talked about even having a planning session after the annual meeting. All the new board members and the old board members get together and kind of think about the next year. Just kind of free associate what you'd like to do, some of the goals that you have. Give yourself an opportunity to reflect on what you would like your association to be and share that with each other. Share that with, I mean, it's a human dynamic. You're gonna have a much better result if you work together as a team than separately. Remember that you will not be on the board of directors forever, so always keep an ear and an eye out for your neighbors. Who's going to be a good neighbor? Who's going to be a good person to run for the board of directors? Always thinking about that, because some of us end up being on the board for years and years and years, which, and you know, this lovely, and we're complimented, and it's a lot of work, can be a lot of work, you know, and you just want to be able to know that the people who are following you are good, and doing that by being aware of the community and who's going to be leading next. And then when you are on the board, always expect the best. It's important, again, it's your perception. You're the leaders in your community association. Sometimes it's not easy to say to another board member, well, you know, you really do need to vote. We need to have your participation. Or you haven't shown up in 6 months and we meet every month. We really need to have this. Have you considered resigning so we can get somebody who can be here at the meeting? You know, well, and these things happen, and you don't always have rules that allow you to do something. Expect good performance. We have material that we can give to your board members. If you want to require, it's kind of interesting, but if you want to require that someone have a seminar, that they attend one of our workshops when they get on the board, you could make that a board policy and say that we require that every new board member attend at least one training session that's offered by the management company. We have a couple of community associations. When they have new boards, I'd say about every 2 years, they ask us to do a training session for the whole board. We all get together for about an hour just to talk about their duties and help them be comfortable with their role as boards. We will help you with this in any way that we can. You have a great job. It can be a lot of fun. It is something that's serious, but it's wonderful because it's affecting the places that you live, and we'll certainly do whatever we can to help you on that. Thank you very much for your attention.